Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation. My name is T.J. Jackson, and with me is my eldest brother, Taj Jackson.
What's up, T?
What is going on, big bro? How you doing?
Good. Doing well.
Very good. Today's date is November 1st, 2023. We are live, of course, on Facebook and YouTube, but you may be listening to us on your favorite podcast platform. That is correct. The D.D. Jackson Power of Love show is not only on Facebook and YouTube, but it's on all the major podcasts. So if you'd like to consume the content that way, please look out for us on all the podcast platforms. And if you find the show entertaining or resourceful or educational, hopefully all three of those, please consider leaving a review on the podcast, as it will help others who may be looking for this such important topic of grief and loss and hope. It may help them find it with more and more reviews. So we want to encourage anyone who is enjoying the show to do just that. Please leave a review. Now, with that said, there's time for a disclaimer to be shared, and that is we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people who've experienced loss in our lives. We have been impacted by it, and we have learned from it. And what we like to do here is we like to share our opinion in an attempt to help you, the viewer, the listener, or anyone. We would like to help you guys get through whatever it is you may be going through. With that said, though, if you need professional help, we urge you to seek and find it. Please do not just rely on us or our guests. All right. Taj Jackson, I guess it's been a little while since we've done this, but I guess we should talk about how people can help the D.D. Jackson Foundation. And that is quite simply, if you can help us in a variety of ways. You could share this episode, share prior episodes, share any episode to someone, a friend, a family member who you think may need some help. This is show number 299, one show shy of 300. So we've covered a lot of different topics, and we are quite confident that there is a topic out for almost everybody who may need help. Because obviously, one thing we hope our regular viewers and listeners have learned, there's different types of grief, and there's different avenues and different roadways to heal from grief. And we like to think that with 299 shows, we've talked and discussed a lot and can help quite a bit of people out there. Of course, another way is you can donate. We suggest, if you're going to donate, to please go to www.ddjf.org. It's just the foundation's initials, the D.D. Jackson Foundation. So it's ddjf.org, and click the donate button there. Another way you can donate right here during these live streams on YouTube, or you can go to Facebook. So there's many ways to donate. But again, we understand if you can't donate, just sharing our content and leaving positive reviews if you enjoy it help quite a bit. Taj Jackson, anything else that I may have missed before we discuss what is going on in our world?
No, I was listening. Not really. You hit everything.
Okay, very good. Taj, so with that said, let's go quickly into an intro, because we have an amazing guest standing by for us, and we definitely want to get into that ASAP. But today's date is November 1st, which means yesterday was Halloween, and you are one with 3 young girls, and I'd love to just give an update on and I know Halloween, is it your favorite holiday?
That and Christmas are like tied, but Halloween gets the nod just because it's like the underdog in that way, and I've always loved Halloween since I was a kid in that way. So yeah, I would say Halloween. I like the Christmas spirit aspect of it, but I love Halloween for what it is as a holiday.
Okay, let me just go straight out. What was the highlight of yesterday? What did you guys do? Did you have a good time? And what were the girls? Curious to know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the highlight is always just seeing it through their eyes in that way,
Yeah.
and seeing them experience Halloween and trick or treating and getting candy and telling them to go up to the go up to the different houses and stuff and being
Yeah.
shy and
Yeah.
that's the experience of that aspect of it that I love in that way. I was a skeleton. Tiana was a skeleton. Taylor was a ghost, and Toria decided and Tylee was a pumpkin, and Toria
Okay.
decided to go completely left field and be a ladybug.
Oh,
So
wow.
we had a bunch of spooky things, and then Toria as a ladybug,
Very
basically.
cool. Very
Yeah,
cool, Taj.
yeah. So
Well, I hope it was a memorable Halloween for
of
you
course.
and enjoyable.
Did you do
Uh,
anything special? What did
I
you do?
just took Rio. We're tired, man. We've been through this so
18.
many times. But Rio being 8, he's still at that great age where it's all fun and exciting. And I just took him to a local neighborhood and we trick or treated for about an hour and 10 minutes, and he had a blast. So
Yeah,
it,
it
it,
got
it was
crowded for a little while, huh? For you as
not for
well.
me. It wasn't as crazy. Yeah, but it was tiring. It's fun though. It was fun. He got so much candy, and who's gonna eat half of it. So
Yeah,
that's a whole nother scenario. But it was good. It was good. Can't complain.
I like Halloween too. Also, real quick, just because I see a lot of adults very much childlike or acting like
Yeah,
kids, stuff like that. They're excited and they're running
yeah,
around. And that for me, I feel like sometimes we lose that as adults. We lose that nature of being excited to do something and dress up and all that stuff. So it's just
yeah. So that's so well said, and I definitely saw and experienced that. It's like a license to be young and to be free. So
yeah, exactly.
very very good point. All right, well, Taj, let's go into our show if that's okay with you, my friend.
Good.
All right. So on today's episode of the Power of Love Show, we are welcoming a special, special, special guest. Her name is Lisa Keefauver. Lisa is a grief activist and the founder of Reimagining Grief. Lisa has more than 2 decades of professional experiences with grief and loss. She has worked as a social worker, narrative therapist, and educator within multiple settings from nonprofits to corporations and universities. Lisa's wisdom and understanding of grief is also embodied from her personal losses, including the death of her husband in 2011. Lisa's grief advocacy has inspired her to create and host the top rated podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, GSB, serve as an adjunct professor of loss and grief at the University of Texas at Austin, act as an organizational consultant to facilitate grief smart organizations, write and appear as a thought leader across media platforms, including her viral TEDx talk, Why Knowing More About Grief Can Make It Suck Less, and write her heavily anticipated book, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, an uncensored guide to navigating loss, which is set to release in June of 2024. Here today to share a bit more about her remarkable work. Without much further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lisa Keefauver to the Power of Love show. Lisa!
Hello.
Welcome to our show, Lisa.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me. It's so lovely to be. I was saying to you before we went on air, it's nice to be on this side of the microphone,
You
to be
know,
the interview instead of the interviewer. Although I love hosting my show, probably the favorite thing that I do in my work is host the show, but it's fun to be on the other side of the mic.
It's so funny you say that because as we started out on the one side of the mic, being interviewed, and then
Yeah.
since doing these shows, we've started out interviewing,
Yeah.
and I understand what you're saying. There's like a freeness to just being asked the
Yeah.
questions and
Yeah.
just like I don't know. So I completely
Yeah.
understand what you are saying.
So thank you.
Before we get into some questions, Lisa, how did I do with your
You
last name?
nailed it. I was really
Yes.
trying to be quiet in this back room here, but I was clapping
Yes.
away. Keefauver. It's, not everybody gets it. I have to say I probably mispronounce it every once in a while myself.
You know
so.
what? Not a common
No.
name, but one thing I gotta say, you really you really gave me some great insight into how to pronounce the name. So
Like
I
a little
appreciate it.
phonetic explanation there for
I
you.
appreciate it tremendously.
Yeah.
Anyways, Lisa, you are devoted to
Yeah.
cultivating a more grief-informed society through various means,
Yeah.
such as activism, teaching, hosting a podcast, and writing a book. And that's just some of the things you're doing.
Some of the things inspired. I take, yeah.
I want to start off here. What drives your
Mm.
passion and commitment to creating a more grief literate world with your brand and reimagining grief?
Yeah. Yeah. Not many people grow up and think like, I want to be a grief activist when I grow up. Probably not your childhood dream. A long and short answer, it really comes from my personal and professional, worlds sort of colliding. Um, but that's what drew me to create Reimagining Grief formally, which happened in 2019. I am a social worker, as you were sharing at the top of the show. So I spent my early social work career in foster care, adoption, public housing, crisis intervention. So I was seeing grief and loss, although we weren't naming it as grief and loss, right? Like the world was saying, oh, it's depression, it's oppositional behavior disorders, right? We were pathologizing people, really, when I look back now, having experienced profound loss, but nobody was naming it as loss and the pathology there. And at the time, I was the clinical director of a nonprofit when my very young husband and my husband, who had been misdiagnosed for a year, was told he had a grapefruit-sized brain tumor and died in my arms within 2 weeks, after getting the diagnosis. And here I was in the professional world. I am, top therapist, mental health in this field. And I looked around at the field and really began to see how grief illiterate, even the people who you would think should be the most grief illiterate were, and how much harm that was causing myself, my daughter. And then I started to really understand the ways in which all of us collectively had been doing a disservice to the folks in the community. So there was some gap between that time. So my husband passed in 2011. I went on to found a nonprofit that helped cancer patients do other work. And really in 2018, 2019, with a previous health scare, not the one that I'm navigating right now, I thought, I can't have gone through this personal and professional profound experience of grief and loss, be a speaker, be a writer, because I had, of course, done things as a founder of a nonprofit in terms of the public space, and not do something with it. I could really see the ways in which we were all suffering unnecessarily in our grief. And I had all this experience, and I felt like it would actually it was my calling to find a way to shift the culture. So that's what happened. 100% of us experience grief multiple times in our lives. And yet,
yeah,
so illiterate. And so between my training in narrative therapy, as a social worker, as a speaker, as a writer, all those things sort of coalesced for me to say, what am I doing with this one sweet life that I have? And much to the chagrin of most people in my life as an only parent and having worked in nonprofit, which means, not making a lot of money. I'm like, I'm quitting my job and creating a company all about grief. And I'm going to launch a podcast. And this was 2019, by the way. So pre-pandemic, much to the chagrin of everybody. And I knew so deeply in my heart and soul that this is how I'm going to spend the rest of my days, is doing.
Wow. It's amazing.
Yeah.
There's so much I could follow up with, but one thing I want to ask, because I don't think we've asked this question to any guests, or maybe it's just not a common question, something I can ask a lot of people. You said when your husband was misdiagnosed. There's all different types of grief we can experience, and a lot of different griefs I'm sure you went through, just with that specific loss. My question to you is, and really for those who may be watching or listening, do you still get frustrated by the misdiagnosis? And what have you learned about how to deal with misdiagnosis? Because that's something I don't think we've had to experience yet. But I'm sure at some point it may very well happen to us, but I know it happens quite often. And that's a whole different thing, because then you start playing a what if game, or And I'm curious, since you've experienced it, if you could share some insight into that journey that you had to go through or are still going through.
Yeah. Okay, couple of things I want to touch on. So help wrap me around if I get sort of lost. I've
You're
actually gone
okay.
through it. I've gone through it twice. So I did go through it with my husband, but the cancer that I'm experiencing, which is if you're watching, wondering why I have this very awesome pixie cut, it's because I lost all my hair because I'm going through cancer treatment myself now. But I think there's two things about the misdiagnosis and the what ifs that I want to touch on, and the kind of ambiguous grief that I went through that I think is a common form of grief that many of us experience based on different circumstances. So as I mentioned, I was 40, he was 44 at the time. We ran triathlons, very healthy, and he started to become a very, very different person, behaviorally, physically, cognitively. We went from doctor to doctor. They said, oh, it's depression, put him on pills. Then he got worse. They said, forget, the pills were the wrong pills, take him off the pills, go to therapy. Anyways, long story longer, our lives really unraveled to a point where it was dangerous in my house and uncomfortable. So when the diagnosis came, as I said, 2.5 weeks before him passing in my arms, there was a revelation and thankfully a time for us to come back together and sort of acknowledge, oh, this is what's been going on. This is why it's been, and sort of reconcile, which I'm eternally grateful for. But the ambiguous grief that happened there I was in the room, which I think anybody who has a family member with Alzheimer's, dementia, addiction, right? I was looking at the person I knew and loved, but he was not the person I knew and loved. And so I didn't name it as ambiguous grief at the time because I didn't have this lexicon of language that I do now, but it would have been so helpful because I think for many of us who experience any kind of ambiguous grief, we don't feel like we have permission to grieve really because, well, at least because people start stupid sentences with the phrase, at least they're still alive, at least they're whatever. So I think that was really problematic. And certainly in the early years after his passing, I did a lot of, and I yelled at the doctors. I insisted, and they never ran a test for an entire year. And then they ran the MRI and found the thing. So I definitely played a lot of what ifs for a while, like many of us do if we've lost a family member to death by suicide or addiction or, right, any of these things. And I don't remember if it was a friend or a fellow therapist said to me, you know, the what ifs and the ruminations. Actually, I had a guest recently who said a version of this too, which was so helpful. It was like, if you would have known, would you have done something to prevent the outcome? And if the answer is yes, then you've got to let yourself off the hook, right? So if I would have known a way to say the right words, get the thing done, I would have. And just being able to gift yourself that lets you off the hook. I think the other thing that I learned, although I hung on to that what if for a long time, which many of us do because it keeps us connected to the person. And actually the what if, just like rumination, sorry to nerd out a little here on the science of it, but that keeps us from actually grieving because we just keep playing the scenario that doesn't end in the bad thing.
Yeah, it's very interesting, very powerful.
Right? It doesn't end in the bad thing. So there's that piece. So I'm not saying that I don't have days where I still rail. I do. More present to me is my own current breast cancer diagnosis, which I found the lump a year, 13 months before somebody actually did a biopsy to find out that it was cancer. I had an ultrasound, I had a mammogram. They kept saying, never mind, go away, you're fine. Another mammogram, another appointment. And I kept saying, this can't be right. And so that brought up a lot of old stuff, right? Like here I was advocating again, being dismissed. So can I say I'm over all of that? No, I definitely still am holding on to some resentment. And because you'll hear in today, both and is my favorite. And is literally tattooed on my body. Having that diagnosis delayed allowed me to do some really powerful personal and professional things. I was able to attend to a family member who was very unwell, which I wouldn't have been if I was in the middle of treatment. I was able to relocate to California, which if you're going to go through cancer treatment somewhere, Southern California is a pretty good place to do it. I was able to write my book and turn it into the publisher. I was able to keep doing my podcast. I was able to audition and get my TED Talk. Like not shiny, like, oh, happy ending story, because it still sucks and I've been through hell. And there's really something to be said for seeing the gift in the divine timing of things. I think that's been one of the paths that helped keep me from literally being laid flat on the floor, because I definitely have experienced enough things to keep me there if I wasn't really willing to get back up. And not that there's anything, by the way, wrong with being on the floor. Sometimes we just need a friend to come get down on the floor with us and keep us company there for a while when we just can't get up. So yeah. So that's it. But just to any listener who has experienced any kind of ambiguous grief or had a loss where they learned later on, like I said, I've had many guests like death by suicide, or they didn't know. If you would have done something that could have changed the outcome, would you have? And if the answer is yes, then please, inviting you to offer yourself some compassion and grace.
Yeah.
And set that down.
That is so powerful. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because it takes a lot of us, a village, to really educate each other in different techniques and tactics, because we've made it no secret, and those who are watching, most of who are watching or listening probably have heard me say this at some point, but when we lost our mother in 94, I felt like the resources were so slim, and first and foremost, Taj and I and our whole foundation want to commend you for all the things you're doing to helping so many people get through this very challenging journey. By being open, being honest, and talking about your story and your loss and all of your situations, it's a very powerful thing. So first and foremost, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
One thing I've already noticed about you, Lisa, is you seemed, and maybe it's because of multiple experiences of dealing with grief, but you seem to be able to shine a light on, I don't want to say the positive sides, but things you were able to do or achievements. You mentioned moving to Southern California. You mentioned finishing up your book and the TED Talk and all these things that came, while dealing with an incredible, challenging time in your life. Has that been something you've always been doing in terms of focusing on some bright spots? Because that's another thing I think a lot of people struggle with. When they're dealt a difficult blow, they can't see any positives out of it. And I like to think that that's an important process in the healing and in the grounding of your situation, is seeing all sides as much as you can.
Yeah. I think 100% finding the growth opportunity. My mom taught me this expression when I was really young. More swear words. Sorry. I don't know.
It's okay.
Okay. So more swear words. Another different tattoo on my body is this expression, AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity. So when something, hell happens, and let me just, sort of cushion this by saying, I absolutely rail against toxic positivity. And I don't think it's useful or helpful to do that. I think that's a bypass from being with, which is our number one job, being with every emotion and feeling that comes our way, including being with all of the emotions in our grief, because grief is not just sadness. So just saying, like, I'm not like immediately something shit happens and I'm like, it's okay, because, and like, just like shiny, Mary Poppins kind of attitude. And I think it's been an incredible resource for me to ask myself the question after some period of time and then ongoing. So not immediately, right? Is what is the AFGO in this situation? What is the growth opportunity? Sometimes it's a reconnection with somebody. Sometimes it's an ability to see beauty in the world where you weren't seeing beauty. I mean, I cultivated a practice of beauty walks, which I've been doing for the last 11 years, which has been a mindfulness practice, which has been hugely helpful. I do think, and the data is there. There's an incredible book out there called Awe by Dagner Keltner, who's a researcher, professor at UC Berkeley. And he describes, 10 or 12 different categories of awe. And and awe can be that grand kind of awe, like standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon kind of awe, but awe can be in the act of generosity or kindness of another person. There's a physiological, neurobiological thing that happens to us when we're in a state of awe. And I think for me, these AFCO moments, and I've only shared 2. I've had more, and I think many of us have had our own, multiplicity of these. Each one, not just because they happened, but because I was willing to turn into the face of them and sit in the suck, as some say, has made me more able and capable to be present to awe and wonder and joy in my everyday life than I would have if I had turned away from dealing with what has happened. I mean, as an example, there was, a couple months in the midst of chemo, besides all the pain and swelling and everything I had, where I couldn't taste food, or everything tasted horrifically metallic, like tasted like poison. Now I can taste food. And let me just tell you, when I can taste something that tastes like that food, I'm practically crying and orgasmic at the moment, right? That gratitude. So again, not the shiny, happy, just be happy and be grateful. Don't ever say to a griever, at least you should be grateful for whatever, X, Y, and Z. It's for each of us to find for ourselves. It's worked for me. It's definitely how I invite the people that I work with individually or collectively in groups to think about when they're ready. When you're ready, can you see some beauty? Can you see some growth? Can you see some insight or some wisdom? Can you find a way to turn what you've had, like you all are doing at the D.D. Jackson Foundation, and impacting somebody else's life? Doing an act of generosity, someone can receive that as an experience of awe as well. Yeah.
I haven't heard of that book. I'm going to check it out.
It's so fantastic. I'm working on getting him on my podcast, so hopefully he'll be on Grief is a Sneaky Bitch later in season 5. But if not, check out his book. I know he's been interviewed by Krista Tippett's podcast On Being. I know he's had a conversation with her and others. It's great.
One more time, his name?
Dachner. I think it's Dachner. Keltner. Keltner. Awe is the book, and they did a longitudinal. I think it was a longitudinal study. He brings his own personal loss of his brother sort of as the backdrop into the book, but I think ritual and awe and finding our shared connectedness in the wake of these profound losses is medicine. It's medicine.
I'm going to check it out. And thank you for that. And thank you for that answer, of course. I love AFCO. Never heard of that, but it's powerful. And I'm
going to start a merch line soon. So just let you know.
I love it. I love it. Taj, are you okay? You want me to, because I got more questions, but you want to
go for it. Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Lisa, you have a viral TEDx talk titled "Why Knowing More About Grief Can Make It Suck Less." Very cool title, by the way. You have a lot of great titles and a lot of you must have been a strong English student when you were younger.
I did. Right? I have always loved writing, and narrative therapy was my specialty. So I think that there's a power in language.
Yeah.
So yes, thank you. But I appreciate it. It's fun to have that creative license.
It's beautiful. Anyways, the TEDx talk, another great achievement under your belt that you've accomplished. I'm interested, if you don't mind, if you could share your experience during the process of delivering the talk and elaborate on the mission and purpose behind the talk.
Yeah. So that was such an interesting thing. I for people who have listened to my show, if you're new to me, hello. But if you've listened to my show, you've heard me say this before. Last year was such a both and year. It was like I got audition and found out I got accepted to deliver a TED Talk at UT Austin, TEDx Talk, which giving a TED Talk has been a career-long dream, and got signed with a publisher. And between being, agreed to have the talk and turning in my final manuscript to the publisher, and before delivering my TED Talk, I got diagnosed with cancer, right? So the universe was like, have it all.
Yeah.
So doing the TED Talk was, sometimes you have dreams and then you do something and you're like, wah, wah. I did that TED Talk and it was even better than I could have imagined, even given everything that was going on. A couple of things that were really interesting, having done the podcast for so long, and I'd spoken on stages in front of bigger audiences than that. So that speaking in front of people wasn't a particular challenge to me. What was an interesting challenge for me is, how do I take all that I want to say about grief, right? Like, what is the most important things I want to say, and put it in 18 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Right? Because you cannot
Done.
like absolutely no. And I can get on stage and like this and riff till the cows come home. But with the TED Talk, you have a very like you memorize no teleprompter an 18-minute talk.
Wow.
So
No
there's no
teleprompter.
No teleprompter. That, if you will go check out my TED Talk, besides the audio, no offense to my team, but they kind of messed up my microphone. So ignore the audio scratches and just watch that. That is 100% memorized. So here I am going from MRI machines, getting more biopsies, figuring out what stage my cancer is, et cetera. And I'm like writing and rewriting and refining and working on memorizing 18 minutes of the talk. So that was a really unique, the challenge of doing that just as a speaker was an interesting challenge. As a grief activist, it was really interesting to think about, again, what do I want the audience to walk away with? What's, what's the most important thing they need to know about grief, if this is their starting place? And then get on the stage to do it. So I ended up doing, you all can watch it, so I won't go over the talk, but I came up with this concept called the 5 W's of grief, which is the who, what, where, when, and why of grief. And really the talk, besides kind of telling my backstory, which they always invite you to do, and a TED Talk, was to really help expand the narratives of grief. We have this very dangerous, narrow, singular story of grief that causes a lot of unnecessary suffering. And that's why the titles Make It Suck Less, besides being funny, is I don't think grief is hard. It's going to be hard because we've lost something that we loved, a person, a relationship, an experience, a place, memories, meaning. Sometimes we lose a dream, right? So it's not always a person. But what makes it harder is that we have this very narrow view of you move through this myth that you move through 5 stages, that it ends, that, you're supposed to get on with it, that it only happens when it's death, only if you're close to the person, all the myths that we have. So I ended up coming up with this concept around the 5 W's that helped us expand, who experiences a grief and what kinds of grief, the 10, 15 types of grief we experience, and how it impacts our whole selves. That's one of my favorite parts of the talk, which is not just our emotional well-being. It impacts our cognitive, our physical, relational, spiritual well-being too. So it was just kind of a magical experience. It was very surreal to be, doing that, while then literally came back 2 days later and went for another MRI, double MRI, got another biopsy. I was having surgery within less than a month after delivering my TED Talk.
Did the TED Talk, the preparation of the TED Talk, help you get through?
It really did. A lot of people were like, oh my God, how are you focusing? And for sure, there was definitely days where I was having a hard time focusing. Also, by the way, I was still recording my podcast and interviewing guests and teaching my class at the University of Tech. Like, I was still working. But the TED Talk, I think, having to prepare with that kind of precision did give me a place to escape from the fear, from the rage that I felt about and not escape completely. Let me just be clear. I also got myself back into therapy and was using my somatic and my mindfulness practices, but you can't live in the depths of all of that all the time. So preparing for the TED Talk and just being with joy, back to our conversation about the growth opportunity and saying on wonder, was like, I could say like, this all sucks so bad, and I am going to stand on a TEDx stage. Like,
first of all, I don't understand. So maybe you can explain this to me. How I would have thought. Let me say it this way. I would have thought there's limits to how much grief we can handle in a day. You are going through this situation. You're doing a podcast, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Yeah. You got the TEDx talk, which I know you are preparing like a mad woman to do, to nail. So your life and world is literally, feels like, at least it seems like, was pretty much 100% around the topic of grief and loss, and you're physically going through it. Yeah. So how, I guess, it shows that we can handle a lot. That's you're living proof of that. Yeah. And I'm curious to know, was there any escapism, or was there one thing that really helped you, or was it a mindset change that you had to have, or that you have, that helped you deal with all of this grief related issues and topics around your life?
You know, this is going to sound really odd. I mean, before being diagnosed with cancer, of course, my life and world was, grief and loss
Yeah.
sort of 24/7. I'm also the person in people's personal lives that shows up and writes cards, and I'm the
Yeah.
person people send
You're the
people to.
go-to person. Yeah.
I'm one of them. Thankfully, I know a lot. So that wasn't necessarily new. And I'll say something that sounds odd to you. People ask me this all the time. My family, especially early when I started Reimagining Grief, they're like, isn't this going to be so depressing? Like, aren't you getting stuck in it? And honestly, there's so much vitality and compassion that you have to be connected with at all times to be in this space, that I feel a kind of aliveness that is, I mean, of course it's heartbreaking. And when I have clients, when I work with one-on-one, or when I'm interviewing guests, like we've had this mutual guest, Colin Campbell, on our show, who's telling me the story. I'm reading his book and telling me the story about the death of his 2 children. Our heart breaks, but I don't think the point of life is to look away from heartbreak. I think the point of life is to look to somebody's heartbreak and say, you love and you experience sorrow, and I love and I experience sorrow, and we are one. We are in this life together. So all of that to say is that was happening predating the grief I was going through with losing my hair, losing half my breast, like all the losses that I was experiencing. So I did have to dig extra deep. I doubled down when I had the energy on what I call my beauty walks, which is just a mindfulness walk where I'm looking, intentionally only looking for beauty, which again, in Southern California is not that hard, but I did it even in other places that I lived. I got back into therapy myself, particularly around somatic therapy, because I knew there was a lot going on in my body that I needed to do. And I'll tell you what, becoming a widow at 40 and then, going through cancer, now it turned out, around 52, I'm 52 now. I learned and relearned the lesson I learned when I was a teenager and first became a scuba diver, which is sometimes buddy breathing is necessary. And, one of the things that got me through was when people offered to help me, I let them. I mean, I'm just going to mic drop that for a minute. Like,
No,
when
really.
people offer to help, it's so hard for so many of us. There's lots of cultural reasons that we don't let people help, whether it's our toxic masculinity, our capitalism, our individualism, all the myths that run all of our isms in our systems. But also as a social worker, as somebody who's in the grief space, I had a lot of myths built up that I'm, and I live alone, that I'm just going to handle it. I don't want to be a burden to anybody. And I'll just share this one last thing about that, which is the chapter that I still had to write between my diagnosis, which was January 20th, and the day I had to turn my book manuscript into my publisher, January 31st, was the chapter on letting people help you in grief and why it was important.
Wow.
Like, okay, universe, again, got it. So one of the first decisions I made when I started telling people, both my sort of community that I've built with Reimagining Grief and the show, but also my personal community, was I'm going to ruthlessly and with grace accept all offers of support. And it was awkward as fuck so many times in the beginning. And what I learned is it's such a gift to the other person. We want to help the people that we love. And when we refuse to help, because we think we're going to be a burden to them, we're robbing them of the experience of taking some action in the face of what feels like something they can't control and something that hurts their heart. So letting people help me. I had friends fly across the country to show up at chemo appointments with me. I had followers on social media, like daughter knit me a knit cap when I lost all my hair and sent me a sweet knit cap. Anytime somebody asked me for my Venmo handle, I was like, okay, which was counter, I think for a lot of us, it's really counter to our, I'm going to do this myself and I'm strong and I got this. And it was revelatory. And to tell you the truth, it made me feel so much less alone, which was really profound, because grief makes us feel alone. Cancer makes us feel alone. I'm a widow. I live alone. My daughter is grown and away to college. So there's a lot of aloneness. And just, even though, I'm new to this community, it's like I felt tethered to so many people. And we need that when we're grieving, when we're going through illness. We need to feel tethered to community. So Let people help you.
It's great. It's very powerful. I mean, I
It's
just did a
powerful medicine too. Yeah.
I just did a live stream talking about that. I didn't want to be a burden for anyone if I ever got ill, but you've made a great point, and so there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a comment from Dee's Tiny Kitchens who says, "I bet you never realized how strong you were, Lisa, to deal with all that, and you pulled through."
Yeah.
That's, and I wanted to ask you something.
Yeah.
Have you realized? Have you had a new kind of aspect on your ability to handle loss and things that are thrown at you by going through everything? Like, are you finding yourself stronger or more able to handle more than you thought you could in the past?
It's an interesting question, and thanks, Dee, for the comment. And I want to answer it sort of twofold because, I can't do a simple answer. When one is, I think I appreciate people's acknowledgments of my strength. I hear it a lot, and I think other grievers hear it too, especially if you're, a public figure, and you may all have experienced this, right? With, the passing of your mom, right? You're so strong. I don't know how you do it, which comes from a really beautiful place. I think we have to be careful collectively, because I think when we applaud people for being strong, it does the opposite of what I was just saying. It kind of sends the message to the person that I've got to be strong, and I can't show my weakness, and I can't ask for help, because we've decided that strong is doing it by yourself. So I think I do feel strong, Dee. Thank you. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think I appreciate when I try to say to people, I know you're having to be strong now, and I see that in you. And I want you to know, if you need help carrying the weight, sometimes I'm here for you.
Mm.
Right.
So it's acknowledging the strength that you're seeing, but also, I love it. I love it.
So I think that's the truth. I do feel stronger than each subsequent loss in my life. I certainly feel stronger than I was before, and part of that isn't just from having had the hard thing happen. I think the strength that all of us gain is by being vulnerable, showing our weakness, learning new strategies, asking for help, trying on approaches or skills that worked before and now didn't. It's like we build the strength not just for having gone through the hard thing. We build the strength by showing up in our full humanity, even in our, in the ugly tears and the weakness and all of those things. And I certainly feel, I'm just very post radiation. So right now I feel tired and burned a little bit right now, although I've got my hair growing back. So physically, I still feel tired, but mentally, emotionally, I'm finding a new capacity to feel like I can handle the waves of life with some equanimity. Yeah.
Nice.
So I think all of us have that capacity, by the way, every single one of us. And you don't have to wait for a bad, hard thing to happen for you to start connecting with those things. It certainly is the opportunity, but you don't have to wait for that bad, hard thing to start to ask, what is it that I'm here to do? And how can I strengthen myself? And strengthening myself has been still showing up in support of other people.
Now, Lisa, you also, which we've mentioned several times, but I want to ask you a couple of questions directly about it. You also host the highly acclaimed podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, available on major podcast platforms. You have certainly captured the attention of listeners. For a couple of questions, what was the inspiration behind launching the podcast? And then also, could you provide some insight into what new listeners can expect by tuning into your podcast?
The podcast, as I said, I do so many different things in my work, but the podcast is probably my absolute favorite thing that I do. I was an early podcast consumer, probably back before most people are podcast cool. I was going to say thought podcasts were cool. Maybe people don't. I'm a podcast nerd. I wanted to create a space where a couple things were happening, where we were talking honestly and openly and authentically about grief and loss. And at the time, there wasn't, I don't know how long your show is, so I don't mean to insult you, but I wasn't aware of a lot of shows out there, doing that. I wanted to use my therapeutic skills and my interview skills. I knew, and my deep passion for holding space and bearing witness, which is in a way what I feel like I'm doing as the interviewer. That's been a sustained meditation of mine. And I think podcasting is so powerful because it allows us to hear someone's story and learn something from them without having to show up at a support group, right? Or be together in a room. Like if you're not ready to go to a grief support group or go to a therapist, hearing two people talk openly, honestly about the ups and the downs and the joys and the skills of grief and loss can be like this private way people can learn, or then they learn how to talk to their brother or their parent. So I knew there was like some safety in creating a podcast. And all that to say, though, I didn't know what that, I mean, I did not grow up in a musical family or with media. I was a clinical social worker. I was like Googling, how do you, a podcast? And from the minute I sat down with my first guest, I knew this was the place. And 75, I don't know, 4 seasons and 75 conversations later, in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of listeners around the world, blows my mind how much those conversations not just resonate in my own mind and heart all the time. Like I think of things my guests have said years later. I still get people listening to the episodes for the first time or re-listening to them and writing me. And it's not always what you think. You might experience this too, TJ and Taj. It's not always like the person who listened to the guest who they lost a son and that guest lost a son. Sometimes the kind of light bulbs and the connections that go off are very different stories. So I love that. I love that my podcast can do that and can give people language so that they can see their own grief in a different way or show up in support of somebody else that they were scared to show up for in a different way. It's just been magical. And I'm preparing for season 5 right now. Took a break, not really this last few weeks, wrapped season 4, and I've been steadily interviewing folks for season 5, and just a dream come true. I pinch myself every time I finish interviewing a guest. So I don't know about you.
Yeah, we can relate. It's been such a powerful thing for us, even in our own healing process.
Yes.
And I could have never predicted that. By no means, I did not expect it, but it's been such a positive thing in a selfish ways for us individually.
For sure.
It's
every
been
time
incredible.
Every time I finished an episode, I learned, even though I've read, if it's an author, I've read their book already, I've researched them, I learned something new every single time, if not many, many new things. And I incorporate that then into my next talk or into my next class or to whatever, or to my own grief. Right. Yeah.
So powerful. So I put up the artwork for it, and I'm going to put it up again. But the podcast is called Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. It's on all your major podcast streaming platforms. Make sure to check it out. Subscribe to it. As Lisa said, it doesn't seem like there's that many grief related podcasts. So it's important that we all support each other and pick up from information and learn from each other. It's the best way to, because the one thing Taj and I always talk about is it seems like grief, and probably because of movies and, like you said, our dependence on being strong, it seems like grief is something we've always pushed aside or tried to like negate. And we strongly feel that the best way to heal is to understand as much as you can about the process and to get rid of the misconceptions and myths. And to do that, you have to have these kind of conversations and deep dive. You can't just go off of a one-liner in your favorite movie or one of the biggest movies of the, so it's very important to deep dive. So kudos to you for doing that and holding your own with your own podcast. And
I love it.
I just think it's great. Okay, Lisa. So another facet you do is hosting workshops. And one of your upcoming virtual workshops is titled Hold Space, Learning How to Show Up for Grievers, Including Yourself. It's scheduled for 10 days away on November 11th. So how can interested individuals participate in this workshop? And what can they expect from the experience of working with you?
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So that's the second in a line of 7 or 8 workshops I'm holding over the next 7 or 8 months as a way, because I get a lot of people asking to work with me one-on-one, and I just didn't have the capacity to work with individuals. So this felt important. And also because I think learning in community with fellow grievers, because grief is actually a communal experience. It's not an individual experience. It is. we experience it individually, but we heal collectively. So that's the other reason to kind of create that container of the group. And my workshops are kind of how you hear me today. They're not stuff. I mean, I'm definitely talking, I'm lecturing. We're going to be journaling. We're going to be chatting with each other. There's no performative sharing. You don't have to share, but it's a reflective, interactive, a place to sort of be in community with fellow grievers, to ask the questions that you maybe don't want to ask in front of your non-grieving friends. Holding space and bearing witness, as I said, was my graduate thesis. It's been a sustained meditation of mine. And so that's really about really debunking all the myths, really dangerous myths we have about what help looks like in our culture. And actually that our job is not to fix the griever, which is the myth that most of us carry, that our job is to hold space, which means to accompany and attend and witness, just as they are. So we're going to be doing that. And this is most of my workshops are just very clearly geared towards someone who's experiencing grief, new or old themselves. This one is going to be a really beautiful dance of the two, because as I say, we are in our lifetime, sometimes at the same time, both griever and grief supporter many times. And one of the things we can learn when we are a griever, as we get to know our grief experiences, what actually is helpful to me when someone shows up and what is not helpful. And that might inform then how we show up differently for a griever. So this Hold Space workshop is going to be sort of a dance for both of us. You can show up sort of with both hats on, right? Both griever and grief supporter. And you're going to walk away learning some tools and some skills and maybe a reframe, of what it means to show up.
Lisa, can people who are interested just go to your website?
Yeah, LisaKeefauver.com. And up across the top of my page, you'll see a little invitation to click to that and join that workshop. I'm holding one the second Saturday of every month. December, I had to switch the date because of an event, but anyhow. So people can sign up one-off. I have some people who signed up sort of for the whole series, but folks are welcome to join. We have not I'm going to hit a certain capacity because I want it to still feel somewhat intimate, but there's still space available. So if folks want to join, I'd love to have you there for this event, or next month I'm doing one on grief in the holiday season, which, can be a tough time for those of us who've experienced loss. So there's something for everyone each month, hopefully.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. We got to talk about your book too. The highly anticipated book, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, an Uncensored Guide to Navigating Loss. It's generating a lot of buzz and is scheduled for release in 10 months, June 2024. Is that 9 months?
Book publishing takes so long. Yeah. Well, I turned it in last January.
Did you?
It takes so long. I don't understand the publishing world, but that's okay. I appreciate my publisher, UT Press. So thank you to them and the team there who's been helping me work with all the, getting all the typesetting and all the editing. And I've had a lot of peer reviewers reviewing the book and giving me a lot of blurbs and buzz. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
So what an interesting process. I want to know about that process. I want to know about the book. What kind of emotions you had to go through in writing the book. Tell us about that. I'm very curious.
It's so weird. I just got a sneak preview of the cover art of the book, and I literally burst into tears because so cool. I've been, I've been dreaming of this book for a long time, honestly. Again, in 2011, and you experienced this even before, when my husband died. First of all, none of my friends had, spousal loss, because who at 40, not very many people. But there just weren't books out there. There were some beautiful books. Joan Didion had a beautiful book, right? There were some good books out there, but there just wasn't a lot of books. I also couldn't read for a year, and I'm a voracious reader because grief brain is a real thing. We don't have time to go into that today. So this book, in a way, has been a long time coming. I've sort of been wanting to write a book that debunks all the myths of grief, that help people see themselves at each phase, because I'm not going to call them stages, because they're not. Offers tools and skills, debunks, but does it in these really digestible ways, because your brain is so foggy, especially in the early phases of grief. But I was like, I'm a social worker. How am I going to write a book? And maybe 2 years ago, a couple years ago, I sat down in earnest with a friend and said, this is right when I started the show. Here's my goals. I want to write a book, and I want to give a TED talk. And within like 4 months of several years later, I kept working, doing all the work that I do. I got the contract and got the TED audition, got it within, I don't know, 3 months of each other, something bananas, because the universe was like, oh, did you want it? How about all now? While also going through cancer. So writing it was exciting, terrifying, imposter syndrome, all the things you hear about writing a book. I sort of was like, I have all these ideas, and then I had an outline, and then I sat down to write it, and I had the like, what the fuck do I know? Who am I to tell anybody anything? Is my sense of, because it has my compassionate approach. It has a few swear words, not a lot, even though the title is Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. It has some humor. It has beauty and art and philosophy. It has all the things that make up me. So writing it was, it was an up and down journey. I definitely had to learn about, because I had all these other creative outlets I was doing at the same time. So I had to really figure out like setting timers and kind of creating cadence for myself. I'm also good with the deadline. So the closer it got to January the 31st, the better I was at being like, okay, Lisa, no, but seriously, you actually have to write this book now. But the beauty, and this is where I go back to divine timing I mentioned earlier, is I don't think I could have written this book 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So even when I said that out loud to my friend, which I think was a really powerful manifestation of what it was that I wanted to do, everything that I've learned from every guest I've had, from every student I've taught at the university, from every individual client I've had, from the ways I've showed up for friends and they've showed up for me, what we witnessed in the world with all of the collective grief and loss that we have and are currently experiencing, all those things were right for that. So I would just say to you, to anybody who's thinking about, oh, I wanted to write a book, it's okay. Start taking notes, open a Word document, just drop your notes. It doesn't have to be, but like it's there. But I think when I look back to the timing of that contract and the deadline and everything that happened, it was like, I think I could have written a good, a decent book 4 years ago, but I think this book is profoundly more impactful. And what? The minute I turned it in and it was done, I've already thought of other, you'll hear this also from writers. I'm already like, oh, I wanted to include that. So that'll be my next book, I guess. I'm just starting a collection of new ideas for the next book.
Brandy says, I got to get that book and
yes, please.
podcast.
Yeah.
And then Jack Love says, hopefully she reads the audiobook.
I am going to read the audiobook. Yes. So I definitely signed that into the contract. I said, everybody knows my Midwestern twangy voice. I'm from Michigan originally. So everybody knows my Michigan, Midwest twangy voice. So I got to be we're not going to have some other stranger read my book. I got to do it. So
I love it.
I'm not sure when that recording is happening, but it will be soon.
I know that's Taj's favorite question, to make sure that our guests.
I'm an audiobook kind of person. Yeah.
Are you? Okay. Well, for sure. You know what? I am too. And like I said, I think for a lot of us, it's too hard to sit still with, which is why I loved podcasts too, because you can take it out on a walk or, on a drive. I think audiobooks have been really profound. I listened to them a lot early on. I can't do them now because when I'm reading for a guest, I have to like sticky book and mark up the book and I need to take notes.
Yeah.
So I don't listen to audiobooks as much as I used to, just because professionally I need to be able to go back. And I think they're a really great resource. So I'm looking forward to recording that and getting that out around the time that the physical book launches in bookstores. I think the cover art is not even pretty yet, but I believe my publisher said if you go to Amazon.com today or bookshop.org and put in Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, you'll see the paperback thing. There's just not a lot of cover art, all the pretty stuff yet, but you can pre-order the book now.
Ooh.
If you want. If you do, drop me a little DM at Lisa Keefauver MSW on Instagram, or drop me a note on the forum on my website and let me know you pre-ordered it, because as we get closer to the book launch, I'm going to host a live Zoom Q&A for all the folks who pre-ordered my book, so they can ask questions and have a chat. Yeah.
All right. So the book is called Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. It's on Amazon. I love By the way, I grew up, and I don't swear, and I grew up
Yeah.
as someone who never swear, but
Yeah.
I've had to learn how to swear, interviewing people like you,
Yeah.
Lisa. But it's
Sorry.
funny because when I said it, you had your smile like went up like 10%. I don't know if
I just
it's
love
funny.
it. I just love when other people say the name. It just cracks me up.
I love
Grief
it.
is a sneaky bitch, you know?
Okay, so Lisa, we're running out of time. We're gonna have to wrap up, but I want to make sure our community knows the best way to connect with you and learn about you and support your work.
Yeah.
So I have Instagram right here at Lisa Keefauver MSW. And by the way, for those who are just listening, Keefauver is spelled Keefauver. So
Perfect.
Instagram again is at Lisa Keefauver MSW, and then also at Grief is a Sneaky Bitch.
Yeah.
And then we have Facebook, which is just Reimagining Grief. I don't know how Facebook handles work, but if you guess Google or not Google, but if you go in the field, if you search in Facebook Reimagining Grief, it will pop up.
Yeah.
But then there's the website, LisaKeefauver.com.
That's probably the best way. I would say LisaKeefauver.com. I have a newsletter called the Not So Regular Newsletter because grief isn't on a schedule and neither is my newsletter. So LisaKeefauver.com, it'll probably give you a pop-up or you can click /newsletter. And I send that out, once every 2 weeks, whatever. But that's where I'll have previews and links for workshops, for like the book, or for any free events. I do some in-person community events. I'm speaking at conferences all over the country, sometimes which are open to the public. So probably signing up for the newsletter is probably that, and maybe following me on Instagram at Lisa Keefauver MSW is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, or just to keep track of what I'm doing. Of course, like you, I love it when folks follow me, follow the pod on Apple Podcast. And if you love it, leave a rating and write a review. But I say, follow me, check me out at Lisa Keefauver MSW on Instagram, or sign up for my newsletter, or both. How about LisaKeefauver.com/newsletter?
Perfect. So for those who are watching or maybe have it on Facebook, YouTube, you can see this art piece, or what is it, outlay, I think it's called, with all the different designs from LisaKeefauver.com. I want to remind you about the podcast. And then here's one more piece that I didn't put up in the beginning, which was Lisa's TED Talk, which is on YouTube. All these links are going to be in the show notes. So you can also just click on what you are interested in, where you want to start from the description box in our show notes. Okay. Lisa, the last part, we can't let you go without you sharing a final message to our listeners, viewers. What we like to do on the D.D. Jackson Foundation Power of Love show is give our guests the final kind of say. It does not have to be on topic. It can be on topic, but there's no restrictions. Really, you are completely free to talk about whatever you want. I say a minute, or up to a minute, or even 2 if you want. But what does Lisa Keefauver want our community to know or to think about at this present moment?
I love this question. I actually thought about it. Given the collective grief and loss that is so present in our world, given that we're about on Dios de los Muertos, mispronounced that right now, I was thinking about Francis Weller's Apprenticeship of Sorrow is a great thinker and ritualist around grief and loss. And I've been recently taking an online course of his. And I'm going to paraphrase, because I wrote some notes. I'm going to paraphrase what he said. But he had this beautiful message about reminding us to reconnect with the notion that we are all entangled with one another, that our love and sorrow is this universal experience. So he said, I'm going to read this. Again, it's paraphrasing. This is Francis Weller. He said, in times of overwhelm, find a place of shelter, places where we can recall what binds us together, soil and soul. In big ritual or even our own, create your own shrine. Pause in your own imagination and envision individual shrines all tangled together across many miles, creating and holding us together in our shared intention, our shared love, and our shared sorrow for the world. We are wildly entangled.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Very,
So just
very powerful.
When you walk out the door today, when you pick up your coffee from a barista, when you pick your kid up from school, when you are frustrated in traffic, when you feel the overwhelm of the news, just check back into that internal knowing that we all have, that we are deeply, wildly entangled, and that we all long for love. We all experience sorrow. And I think that is what allows us a sense of equanimity when the world feels so overwhelming.
Yeah. As Carrie says, I love that so much. Denise says beautiful.
Yeah.
And Brenda says powerful.
Yeah.
So much great stuff we've learned having you on our show. We thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah.
There are some more comments I want to share. And that is another one from Brenda, who says, she is a powerful guest. I really respect her and her story and how she has done so much. I applaud her.
Thank you, Brenda.
Shauna says, I'm extremely proud of you, Lisa. I guess I'm not there yet. That's okay. Exactly.
Yeah.
Brandy says, this has been the best show I've seen in a while. Thanks, DDJF and Lisa,
Brandy,
for a wonderful show. Jennifer wants to remind us to bring Lisa back on the show, please. She has a lot to say, and we are here for it. But
thanks,
this
Jennifer.
is what I want to say. Jennifer wanted to remind everyone to request Lisa's book at your local library. Helps to get her book on their shelves.
Love me some libraries. My favorite place to be.
It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then Lisa's going to piggyback and said, this Friday, I am pre-ordering. I need this.
Yes. Well, drop me a note when you do. When you sign up for the newsletter, head to my show or on my socials, drop me a note and let me know when you pre-ordered, because I want to just give big love and thanks to everybody who's going to help get this book, ready and out into the world.
There's one more comment I want to share, and that's for all of us. Brandy says, you guys helped me through a lot of hard times, and I really appreciate it. The love and support you gave me was joy and happiness. So I'm so grateful to meet all of you. Thank you so much. And I want to give love and respect and kudos to you, Lisa, and as well as to all of you also in the community who are chatting. And I'm trying to go through all the chats. I know Taj is too, but it's just so beautiful to see everyone rallying around each other. And it reminds me of what you were saying, Lisa, about wildly entangled. And it's a very powerful concept. And I think one that we need to embrace and know and think about more often. So thank you for sharing that final note.
Yes.
Is there anything else I may have missed, Lisa?
We covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate your interest and your invitation to have me on the show and our shared passion for this work. And I hope this will be maybe the first of many conversations we have. So thank you so much for having me today. And thanks to everybody who wrote a kind note. I couldn't see them all, but I appreciate all the kindness and the love that folks were showing. And I'm sending that back to each and every one of you, because we've all been there in some way. And so we're just, walking each other home, as they say.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Taj Jackson, did I miss anything?
No, just thank you so much for coming on in that way. And I've so enjoyed this episode in that way. I don't usually talk a lot anyway, TJ knows with this. So that's not, I'm always intently listening.
I felt that, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
This whole thing has been, this podcast in general for me and the show has been a therapeutic in that way.
Wow.
So
big time.
A lot of the stuff you said rang true, and just your strength and just your go-gettingness aspect to it too, which is something that I admire as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you both. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, it was an honor. I loved being on this side of the mic.
Yes, trust me, I get it.
Her
name is Lisa Keefauver. Again, go to lisakeefauver.com. That is the best place to start into her world. Obviously a brilliant person, brilliant guest. And Lisa, again, thank you for being on. We wish you the absolute best, not only for November 11th workshop, but for the book that's coming out in June, and for your podcast and everything else in life that you touch. We hope it's as great as the TED Talk was. So keep doing your thing, and thank you for being such an important part of the grief community. Really greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. And thanks to everybody watching and listening. I so appreciate each and every one of you.
All right. We will be back next Wednesday at 1 p.m. if you want to join us live. Otherwise, again, you could check us out on all your favorite major podcast platform. That is it for today. We will be back next week. We will see you all next time. Love and peace always. Adios, everyone.